Every year, Ms. Augustine makes a better future for young women through the Jean Augustine Scholarship, a fund that helps single mothers attend George Brown College and Centennial College. She has been honored by many organizations for her leadership and community involvement. In 2009, the Women's Executive Network named her as one of Canada's most powerful women. She was awarded the Luminary Award by the University of the West Indies in 2006, and she has received Honorary Doctor of Laws degrees from the University of Toronto, Guelph, McGill, and York. In December 2009, she was appointed as a member of the Order of Canada. And in 2012, she received the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal. We'd like to also, importantly, like to acknowledge that Ms. Augustine played a critical role in establishing METRAC as a leading community-based organization to prevent violence against women and youth. She was a founding member of our organization in 1984. So, thank you very much for coming out to be here with us so early on this wet morning. And I will pass the mic over to you. Welcome.
Good morning. And so good to see people up and bright and ready to go at 8-something in the morning. So this morning, you asked me to speak about the fact around the theme of your conference, making people count. And I endorse that, making people count, because this theme, making people count, has several meanings. And so I'll take the theme as meaning embracing newcomers and making them count. And the ones that I want to bring to your attention in terms of making them count are the foreign trained workers, those who are internationally educated. I think I did send a package of information, pamphlets, I'm sure. I saw them out on the other night, but we do have a few. If you need some more information and website, etc., we do have some material. So then, I want to acknowledge the work that you're doing in undertaking this conference, and the work that you're doing around equity, and the work that has to continue to go as we reduce violence against families. And you're also providing practical skills and concrete resources for people through all the work you do. Canada, they tell us, will soon face immense shortages of people with particular skills. A shrinking labor market threatens the economy's long-term potential for growth and sustainability. Looking at the demographics, they tell us that people are retiring, that the couples are not repeating themselves. We have 1.02 or something like that. It depends on whose statistics you look at, children per family. And they say that this will continue. The conference board tells us this will continue until about 2030. And some other stats we look at says that by 2035, we'll be completely dependent on immigration for our labor market needs and for keeping the systems operating the way we are today. So we see that our economic future, no matter what numbers we look at, Our economic future is tied to the success of newcomers to Ontario. And I'm sure you're familiar with the figures. Without further immigration to Ontario, it's expected that the working age population will begin to decline, and it's estimated that we'll have a shortage of 364,000 skilled workers by 2025, according to the Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration, Ontario. So this is why I think they've put on the table Michael Couteau, the Ontario Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, announced the Provincial Immigration Act in February. And Ontario businesses, he said, need the skilled workers to stay competitive in today's global economy. Integrating immigrants effectively into Canada's workforce is critical to competing in the global economy. But these are sterile statistics. But these sterile statistics have a human side. As many of you know through personal observation, some newcomers to Canada face great barriers, especially in times of economic uncertainty, and they endure more unemployment. According to the Employment Agency, and I'm going now to the work of Career Edge, the employment gap is widest among people with a university education. About 90% of Canadians with degrees are employed, but only 77% of newcomers with degrees are employed. Newcomers often take survival jobs to make ends meet. Underemployment, we know that strain families in many ways. Think of a well-qualified, internationally trained doctor who cannot find a job in his or her field and ends up as an orderly, for example. Underemployment and unemployment is a main source of domestic violence, family tension, and a threat to overall health. So it's imperative for Canadian society, and I think we all know this. Yesterday, Corporate Canada was told this with all the bells and whistles. It's imperative for Canadian society to embrace diversity. Working together is so important. No group can do it alone. It's everybody's job to welcome newcomers and to promote inclusion. In 2011, there were about 6.8 million people born outside of Canada, and that's about 21% of our population. And that's the highest proportion among G8 nations. Most of you know the European scene, and most of you know the situation around integration. I was in Berlin, in Germany, about a month ago, and in our conversations and in our sessions, their vocabulary was so different from mine. I was talking about immigrants. They were talking about migrants. I was talking about acceptance, and they were talking about tolerance. So the vocabulary is so different. The values that we hold in terms of welcoming, accepting, including newcomers, those notions are notions they're still working at with some difficulty. Visible minorities accounted for 78% of the immigrants who arrived here between 2006 and 2011. In contrast, they make up 12% of immigrants who arrived before 1971. So let me repeat these percentages. 78% between 2006 and 2011, compared to 12% before that time. Debbie Douglas, Executive Director of the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, recently stated that racialized communities, including visible minorities and Aboriginal people, have long been experiencing higher unemployment rates than the rest of the population. But I think I'm telling you what you already know. Ms. Douglas referred to a 2011 Wellesley Institute and Canadian Centre for Policy Alternative report that confirms that there's a color code in keeping visible minorities out of good jobs in the Canadian labour market, where visible minority Canadian workers earn 81 cents for every dollar paid to their other counterparts. Visible minority women now make 56 cents, up from 49 cents in 2000, for every dollar that white men earn, while minority men in the same cohort improved by almost 7 cents to 76 cents. According to this report, even during the boom years, visible minorities had a higher rate of 8.6%, had an employment rate of 8.6% compared to 6.2% for white Canadians. So we see that more needs to be done to remove structural barriers within the labor market that lead to inequitable access to employment. And that's why I support the work of the City of Toronto's working group on city funding support for Toronto's community-based anti-discrimination infrastructure. The working group, as it's called, was established in the late fall of 2012 at the direction of the Toronto City Council. And they have some strategies, which, and I'll just name about 4 of them. One is increasing participation of Aboriginal groups in its equity work, including funding strategies for Aboriginal groups, developing ongoing mechanism for community engagement, developing an equity, diversity, and human rights framework, and a youth outcomes framework for the City of Toronto, and funding strategies that support capacity building and access, equity, and anti-discrimination work. So these are examples of municipalities, of a municipality that's also promoting equity and diversity. But we know if we go further out from Toronto with Markham, where we see the fastest growing newcomer population, about 72% of the people who live in Markham were born outside of Canada. Markham has the highest proportion of visible minorities of any Canadian city. And so they acknowledge that they have some strategic priorities, and they have a diversity action plan. They created a board appointment policy to enhance diversity. They have 4 advisory committees focused on aspects of diversity, 1 on race relations, a 2nd on accessibility, a 3rd focused on young people, and a 4th dedicated to older people. So they have a strategy, they have a plan, they recognize who is before us, who is before them, they recognize what their city looks like. So because of these efforts, Markham has created a climate where people experience both the feeling and the reality of belonging. And I'll say a few words about Peel region, because I know most of the time there are Peel individuals who live in Peel, work in Toronto. Peel did an interesting thing. It set out a Peel Diversity and Inclusion Charter. And the charter promotes inclusiveness, equal opportunities. It's not a legal document, it's a living document. It brings together the rights and freedoms guaranteed in many Canadian laws. And of course, I'm referring to some of the federal laws. And when I speak in international arenas, I mention the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Multicultural Act, the Human Rights Act, the Employment Equity Act, and the Charter and the Human Rights Code, and also the law to promote accessibility for people with disabilities. So the Charter, as Peel Region speaks about this, they pull from those federal charter powers to endorse what's happening in their government, their organization, and their businesses. So it's really a continuing process that bring people together. I cannot resist an aside about diversity in municipal leadership. Some researchers from McMaster University surveyed 23 Ontario municipalities in 2010. They were looking at local councils. They found that only 8% of elected councillors were visible minorities, and only 28% were women. So I think we can do better, especially in Toronto, especially with the municipal election on the horizon. In our city, whose proud motto is diversity, our strength, only 5 of our 45 city councillors are visible minorities. We can change that in the upcoming election. In the Greater Toronto Area, taking in the city's suburbs and exurbs, the numbers are even worse. Visible minorities make up 40% of the population, yet only 7% out of the 253 members sitting on various municipal councils of visible minorities, for a grand total of 18. We must do better. And I encourage you to consider running for office yourself, from school trustee to city council. Get out there. You are the activist. You have studied this stuff. You know what needs to be done in your communities. So we need you to get involved to ensure that we have a truly inclusive and diverse representations. We also have to do better throughout Ontario as well, because among government agencies, the boards, the commissions throughout the province, only 18% of visible minorities are represented, and I'm using statistics from the 2014 Ryerson University study. Toronto profits from diverse and inclusive workplaces. It makes good business sense to hire newcomers and make them feel comfortable in the workplace. The Conference Board of Canada has written that diversity combined with leadership results in many advantages. And I'll take about 4 of the advantages. That there are links to new global and domestic markets. When you have someone who's a newcomer who opens a business here, usually there's someone back home or back there that's a supporter of the business. And oftentimes we see the back and forth. In employing newcomers, increase innovation and creativity, better access to talents, strengthen social cohesion and social capital. A 2008 study by the Conference Board of Canada showed that as many as 40% of skilled immigrants leave the country to pursue better opportunities elsewhere within the first 10 years. So they come with the talent, they come with the skills, they come with the willingness to work, they come to take the risk that there is. And if there is nothing for them, there are some stats that show within 10 years, if they cannot make it, they go someplace else where their skills and talents are needed. And we live in a competitive world, and we live in situations where the skills and talents of those individuals are needed. So How do we get them to stay here and not head down the road? How do we integrate them in order to enhance our prosperity? I read that we have an elevator in my office building, and it has bits of news, and sometimes you pick up some news as you go up to the floor. And one thing I saw a few days ago was the declining population in New Brunswick, and that New Brunswick need to have newcomers make the decision to go to New Brunswick because their population is dwindling. So we know that there are opportunities for people in this country. We know that we need these talented newcomers, but we have to think about how we attract them and how we retain them. The Human Resource Council for the nonprofit sector works on labor force issues, and it has some great ideas for creating a culture of inclusion and integrating newcomers in the workplace. And some of the things they say are things that we've all been saying over the years. Learn about the cultural backgrounds, the lives, the interest of employees outside the workplace. Build relationships and trust to help foster inclusion. Many of us work in situations where we're friendly with people in the workplace, but at the end of the day, you go north, they go south. On the weekends, you never see each other. There is no invitation to do things in any social way with a newcomer or with someone from a different cultural, racial, religious background. And so even though we work together and we like each other, we do not do things outside of that circle. We know the jobless rate for recent immigrants with a university degree. We know also that there is a gap from language barriers or insufficient Canadian work experience. And one of the things that I've done working with the Ontario Human Rights Commission in terms of the work I do was to help to put out a policy statement about this topic. It caused some waves. It's not making a lot of people happy, but we say that unless Canadian experience is a bona fide requirement for a job, it's discrimination to say that you have to have work experience, Canadian work experience. In other words, employers can't just ask for Canadian work experience because that's how they've always done things. We're saying now that that Canadian work experience has to be legitimate, has to be valid, has to be genuine. You have to show the relevancy and the necessity for asking for Canadian work experience. So we talk, let me now say a bit about the regulatory bodies, the bodies that regulate the professions, because I think it's important that they follow the fair access law requirements. And that requirements ask them to justify everything that they have as criteria for registration. And this is what we question in the Office of the Fairness Commissioner. How many people have come to you, have applied for a license? How many have you licensed? How many have you turned away? What are you asking for for requirement for licensing? Are there tests, exams? What tests, what exams? When and where? How long? Have you got appeal processes, etc., etc.? So we drill down on their processes. We make recommendations. We send them away, and we go back and assess the work they do. We've made some headway. And I'd encourage you to go to our website if you are interested in the international educated and the regulatory bodies and how that works. So let me stop here by saying that we have to see newcomers as bringing talent, energy, ideas, international business contacts, languages, high levels of education to our communities. And in the case of the work you do at METRAC, it's so important to recognize that there are some things that are not accepted in Canadian society around violence. And we have to work, whether it is with religious leaders or community leaders, to make sure we get the messages out that violence against women, against children, that violence in our families and our communities are just not the way to go in Canadian society. And we need to empower and to assist and to help those who are victims of violence. But most importantly, you have to continue the work with the judiciary, with the lawmakers, with the police, with others, to ensure that support is given to a woman when she does ask for the resources and the help to get out of horrible situation. Because that is, and that was, the mandate of METRAC and will continue to be the underlying work that this organization has to do. So I thank you so much. I'm so very pleased that you came out today. Thank you.